You made it to the end. You guys have been waiting the longest to get your thing today, so I commend you. We're going to introduce ourselves, then we'd like you to introduce yourselves and introduce your teacher, and then we'll get started. So my name is Julia Longoria. I am an alum of this program, so I was once sitting in your shoes. And I work as a journalist, mostly in audio, so I've worked for NPR, and I now work for Vox, and I do stories. I've done a lot of stories about the Supreme Court.
Hi, Tara Bartlett. I'm a professor at Arizona State University.
Good evening. My name is Dan Wong. I was an attorney and a lower court judge in Nevada. I retired and we moved to my wife's hometown of Boise, Idaho, where in fact I'm currently the interim We the People state coordinator. This is my 34th year in the program, and even though I'm tired, I'm sad this is the last panel we get to hear.
Good evening. My name is Alexander Saad. We're here from Staples High School in Westport, Connecticut.
Hi, I'm Graysen Peters. I'm a junior from Staples High School.
Hi, I'm Olivia Cohn. I'm also a junior. And this is our lovely teacher, Mrs. Cameron.
So we are very excited to have a spirited discussion full of energy at the end of the day of question 2. So I will read it aloud as you get your stuff together there. In City of Grants Pass v. Johnson, the United States Supreme Court held that the Cruel and Unusual Punishments Clause does not prohibit governments from restricting camping in public places by persons experiencing homelessness. Do you agree with this interpretation of the 8th Amendment? Why or why not? What are key differences between the majority and dissenting opinions in City of Grants Pass v. Johnson regarding Cruel and Unusual Punishments Clause? And should the interpretation of the 8th Amendment evolve to reflect changes in society? Why or why not? You may begin.
We disagree with the Supreme Court's interpretation in City of Grants Pass v. Johnson regarding the 8th Amendment's Cruel and Unusual Punishments Clause. While Justice Gorsuch's majority opinion is grounded in precedent and strict textualist reasoning, by distinguishing between status and conduct, it fails to adequately acknowledge the realities of homelessness, in that sleeping outdoors is not a voluntary act, but a necessity of survival.
Justice Gorsuch, writing for the 6-3 majority, argued that historically, the Cruel and Unusual Punishments Clause has applied primarily to methods of punishment rather than to the criminalization of specific behaviors. According to Gorsuch, the Grants Pass ordinances do not criminalize homelessness itself, but rather prohibit specific acts. He cited Powell v. Texas as precedent, noting that laws penalizing public intoxication are constitutional because they target conduct rather than status. Gorsuch also argued that determining policies regarding homelessness is for local governance rather than federal judicial intervention.
Justice Sotomayor strongly disagreed with the majority's distinction between status and conduct, arguing that penalizing individuals who have no alternative to sleeping outdoors punishes their status as homelessness, violating modern interpretations of the 8th Amendment, and Sotomayor cited Robinson v. California from 1962, which prohibited criminalizing narcotic addiction, a condition beyond an individual's control. She writes, quote, "The majority focuses almost exclusively on the needs of local governments and leaves the most vulnerable in our society with an impossible choice, either stay awake or be arrested."
Alongside Sotomayor's concerns of criminalizing homelessness, we believe that this law would be applied in an inherently discriminatory manner, opening the doors for 14th Amendment abuses. Sotomayor highlighted testimony from a Grants Pass police officer acknowledging this selective enforcement. The officer clarified that individuals lying on blankets or sleeping bags recreationally would not be cited, whereas homeless individuals would be penalized. Allowing police discretion to determine who looks homeless prompts race, gender, and other forms of discrimination, and further perpetuates systematic inequities which created conditions for homelessness in the first place.
We believe that the 8th Amendment should be interpreted as an evolving standard of decency, in line with the 14th Amendment's guarantee of due process and equal protection under the law. The Supreme Court has recognized that constitutional protections must adapt to contemporary moral judgments and societal progress. In Troppy Jules, Chief Justice Warren stated, quote, "The 8th Amendment must draw its meaning from the evolving standards of decency that mark the progress of a maturing society," end quote. This principle has guided modern jurisprudence on cruel and unusual punishments, including cases like Roper v. Simmons in 2005, which abolished the juvenile death penalty based on contemporary moral consensus.
Adapting constitutional interpretation to evolving standards of decency means recognizing that punishments considered acceptable at one point in history may become intolerable as society progresses. Historically acceptable punishments like flogging or mutilation are now universally condemned due to changing societal values. Applying this principle to homelessness laws requires recognizing modern understanding of poverty and systemic inequities, especially in light of homelessness dramatically intensifying over the past 20 years. Criminalizing unavoidable behaviors like sleeping outdoors disregards contemporary moral judgments about human dignity. In fact, as of 2015, over 150 constitutions worldwide guarantee human dignity as a fundamental right.
Applying evolving standards of decency logically extends beyond homelessness issues as well. It raises broader questions about other forms of punishment, most notably the death penalty. Justice Breyer's dissent in Glossop v. Gross of 2015 argued that evolving societal standards increasingly views the death penalty as excessive due to its arbitrariness and inherent cruelty. An evolved interpretation of the Eighth Amendment should ultimately lead us to reevaluate these practices.
Rather than criminalizing homelessness, we suggest alternative solutions like homeless courts. These courts, such as San Diego's Homeless Court program, focus on addressing root causes through treatment-oriented measures rather than imposing fines or jail time, and would better reflect modern standards of government respecting their citizens' dignity.
We're now ready for questioning.
We're really ready. I struggle with this case. I find myself agreeing with you and with Justice Sotomayor, but, how do you draw the line between protecting fundamental rights and then having a Supreme Court be legislating from the bench? What's the problem with having the courts sort of step in and say, this is what you have to do?
So I tend to agree with Scalia and with the majority opinion over Sotomayor's argument. I believe that applying the cruelty punishments to evolving standards of decency fundamentally misunderstands the origins of the Colonial Punishment Clause. It was derived from the English Declaration of Rights in 1689, which included certain barbaric punishments were just cordoned off, that we recognized as a society that we had closed the book on these. Now, this said nothing about proportionality, it said nothing about adapting to a moral standard. So if we want these rights, such as human dignity, such as the right to sleep on a public property, it should be instituted through political process, through an amendment, through a law. To quote Justice Scalia, under what conceivable warrant can 9 lawyers presume to have the moral judgment of a nation?
I do respectfully disagree with my colleague Alex, and I agree with you and Sotomayor and our framers. Thomas Jefferson wrote in a letter to Madison explicitly that the earth belongs to the living. He in fact suggested that we update and rewrite our Constitution every 20 years. While this is not currently being implemented, standards must evolve to the evolving rapidly 21st century. And I think this includes seeing homeless people and respecting their dignity.
And I think that the courts have done this before, and they have evolved standards to what was societally equipped and what was societally acceptable at the time. For example, in Lawrence v. Texas and also Overgel v. Hodges, this is a great examples in which the courts have adapted laws and seen ordinances in which status itself of LGBTQIA+ groups and individuals were being criminalized directly. And by adapting such, we can also do this with homelessness and protect homeless people and individuals who are being criminalized for their status alone.
So within your context, whether it be your city, your state, your region, what have you seen in terms of policy response following this case?
We actually talked to our chief of police of Westport, which is our local town, San Marquiola, and while we don't have a proportionately large number of homeless people in our town, I think it is notable, as he stated, that it is important as a police officer to ensure that public safety is a #1 priority, and actually homeless individuals are actually 11 times more likely to commit a crime, and a great way in which to prevent homeless people from doing crimes is actually offering housing initiatives, and this has been seen on a global standard. Finland and Ireland are great examples of this, in which they have housing first initiatives. San Jose's governor, actually California, in which California's really, really bad issues of homelessness, have actually implemented a system in which if a homeless person has denied housing opportunities more than 3 times, then they can be arrested. I think these are great initiatives, and as our chief of police has said, and obviously ensuring public safety, they still want to uphold the rights of people, including homeless people. And so avoiding arresting a homeless individual until the last alternative was something that he prioritized.
To add on to his interview, he mentioned that discretion is the greatest tool that police department has, not to be used in a discriminatory manner, but because it allows the police department to recognize the dignity and individuals of these homeless people, and allows the police department to treat them like human beings rather than just hitting the book at them, which would be the precedent under if we had no discretion.
I think discretion is a really important point to consider. Data from the San Francisco Police Department in 2021 showed that Black homeless individuals are more than 10 times more likely to be cited under these anti-camping ordinances than white homeless individuals. So inherently, these anti-camping ordinances, which have grown across the nation by 69% over the past decade, I don't think they can exist if they're going to be applied in this discriminatory manner and continue to perpetuate these inequities.
Okay, I get your empathy for homeless people, but let me give you a hypothetical. I'm the mayor of Boise. I support, and we have homeless shelters that have beds that go on empty because the homeless don't want those beds. We support food pantries so they can have free food, but they rather panhandle food on the streets. I've got a guy named Martin who has a business who's, he's fearful for his customers because Martin is sleeping on the sidewalk in front of his business, scaring off his customers. What do you say to me?
So while I do not believe that judicial branch should be deciding these ordinances, as a matter of policy, I support that there always be an alternative for homeless people. So it's not an involuntary decision to sleep outside. So I worked with my father in Mexico, helping get people off the streets, working with the Red Cross. I've experienced firsthand how there's people who, because of rules of these shelters, like in Grants Pass, where there was a religious shelter, who just simply don't want to be treated. In my idea, it should not be the court doing this, but as a matter of policy, there should always be an alternative. People should never be criminalized for something that they really have no control over.
You said obviously that these people were not wanting to abide to these shelter programs. I think something that's often overlooked with a lot of these homeless policies is actually the mental health aspect. A CNN study actually found that 25 to 30% of homeless individuals have mental health issues, and this is a huge threat to citizens who are just walking on the street. I think that this is something that also needs to be addressed, offering psychiatric help for these individuals so that they can have chances to thrive in American society and deal with these mental health issues directly can actually be a huge help to such issues.
You talked about in your opening statement, you began to talk about sort of evolving standards of decency and how we used to do flogging and mutilation. I want to go into that a little bit more and zoom out on the Eighth Amendment's cruel and unusual punishments. How have historical shifts in public opinion changed how the court interprets the Eighth Amendment? And what do you think about those shifts?
Well, as discussed in our draft, international and societal consensus led to the abolition of the minor death penalty. And we think this principle should be applied to the death penalty and should be applied to the criminalization of homelessness.
In fact, 68% of Americans actually disagree with criminalizing homelessness, and not even that. In 2014, the UN and countries of the UN actually openly criticized the United States for its approach in how it criminalized homelessness. And I mean, if we look back in the history of the world, this idea of human dignity and morals is not something that's new. Julius Caesar wanted to expand and redistribute land to help the poor. In Rome, papine temples were open as shelter for homeless people and individuals who don't have homes at night. And as in 539 BCE, the Cyrus cylinder actually noted helping homeless people and people who did not have any other alternatives. This idea of human dignity is not something that's necessarily new, and I think that coming from people knowing that 68% of Americans actually don't agree with this, change should be made to evolve and allow for the majority to be represented.
So obviously the will of the people has impacted interpretation of the Eighth Amendment, but this is not in my opinion, this is not something that should be done this way. So in Atkins v. Virginia, which allowed the death penalty for people with mental disabilities, Scalia was famously quoted as saying that there's never been such an opinion that rested so solely upon nothing but the opinions of its members. Instead of having the court interpret what the public will is, they're meant to be resistant to the will of the people as said in the Federalist Papers. This is something that should be done through the most direct representatives of the will of the people. That is the legislation, that is amendments.
Thank you. Wow, you all did a great job. That was really really impressed. We got Scalia in there, we got Julius Caesar in there, I was like, holy crap. So yeah, I just thought your opening was tremendous. It was really well done. I followed it logically, and I feel like you really answered all the questions that we asked you to answer today. I was impressed with the reference to the 150 constitutions worldwide. In your answers, I was impressed that you talked to your chief of police and had interviewed him for this. I liked hearing about the Red Cross and different solutions on the ground. I really appreciated that you disagreed with each other. I was excited to learn that there was some heat on this panel. So yeah, I think I'm really blown away. So really great job. Congratulations.
I echo many of the same things. I think what you artfully did was that you kind of wrapped it up in your final statement that you were making, that this is not a new issue. This has been going on for centuries in a sense, and so thinking about how different spaces and places and times have grappled with this, you did a really nice job of surfacing those. I liked the globalization aspect, so really looking at how other places and you had your personal experience have tried to address this issue. I think that's powerful in looking at what we could learn, lessons learned from those spaces. I also really like that you went to your chief of police and had an interview. I think that adds some context that, obviously maybe you didn't know a lot about this before. I don't know what spurred you to maybe do that, but even, getting some information for this case. But I think it shows that you're at the forefront, because you said you don't have necessarily a large issue within your community, but you're actually starting that conversation now. And so I think that that's powerful, whether again you did it for this question or not. I commend you for that.
I really did enjoy your 4-minute presentation and testimony. You accurately described the arguments for both sides. You used the evidence. You provided analysis that showed that you in fact have an understanding of both sides. I really do appreciate the fact that you're stuck with your guns and your disagreement with the Grants Pass Supreme Court decision. We've had panels that fully, wholeheartedly supported the Grants Pass decision, and they stuck with their guns too, because I asked the flip questions, to really push them. And I enjoyed this, the opportunity to listen to young, bright minds from across the country who may have different opinions and different thoughts, but they have the ability to do some thoughtful analysis. Number one, understand the problem. Number two, do a thoughtful analysis of the problem. And then number three, have some solutions to those problems. So I enjoyed our conversation, and you deserve congratulations.